You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
The following podcast is scheduled for one fall. Coming in at 195 pounds from Studio A, he is the reigning, defending, undisputed host of the Ring of Thunder, Sexy Thor!
What's up, Thunderverse? We are starting off with a little sideways documentary review because I have finally seen, and I'm almost ashamed to admit that it's taken me this long to see, the documentary Beyond the Mat that came out in 2000. That was pretty much a let-in of behind the scenes of the WWF back in the late 90s during the Attitude Era. And I'd heard about this documentary like everywhere and all the time. And finally, I just had to when last week our friends at How to Talk to Your Friend About Wrestling did their book report where they pretty much talk about wrestling documentaries and what have you about Beyond the Mat. And it turned out coincidentally I was on my way to Studio D to hang out and get some more ideas about stuff. And then I got control of the remote. And so I put it on YouTube. I put it on Beyond the Mat and we watched Beyond the Mat. Now, most of the stuff wasn't that new to me because I already knew it through other documentaries and specials and what have you that I learned. But I did see the part where I had heard a lot about Mick Foley and his family in the crowd and his kids getting upset seeing him get his head twonked on with a chair by The Rock. So actually seeing that was a little jarring. But yeah, that's real though. That's what the Attitude Era was. But one part that it was early on and it stuck out to me throughout the whole damn documentary was when they had signed this guy who he wasn't already a wrestler. He was an athlete who had spent some time with the Denver Broncos. Nobody of any super consequence. It wasn't like John Elway or Terrell Davis. But yeah, he was a guy who had played for the Broncos and was now out of the NFL. And he had a special talent, if you could call it that he could puke on command. So that was going to be his gimmick. His name was going to be Puke. And, part of his shtick was that he would vomit on his opponent to get them completely off their game. And then he would beat them. And even once Vince signed the guy, he brought out a bucket and he was just like, "Hey, yeah, can you puke right in here?" And then he was just like, puke right there, but don't get on my desk. And I was just like, holy shit. Vince McMahon is the embodiment of the Jurassic Park line where Ian Malcolm says something along the lines of, your scientists were so caught up or obsessed or whatever word he used with whether or not they could do it, they didn't stop to think whether or not they should do it. I mean, that's pretty much Vince McMahon as a creative force in a nutshell. If he has an idea, he's going to do it no matter what. I mean, let's also not take away the fact that this is a man who turned his father's New York wrestling territory into a global giant. And also the guy he was the one who brought in this big old guy who was cast away from WCW and gave him the gimmick of the Undertaker. Vince was the one that thought of that. Now, granted, Mark Calloway deserves all the credit for protecting that character and making it as believable, and Undead Zombie believable, but I mean, go fucking figure. Stranger things have happened, but not very many. But Vince was the one who thought of the Undertaker character, and he's also the one that thought of the Puke character and a lot of other odd characters that didn't quite hit, but he also thought of a lot of things that did hit. So, I mean, think what you're going to think of the guy. In some strange way, I kind of respect it. But also, like, if he could just stick with, like, a script for Raw and not rip it up and make a new one 20 minutes before airtime, that would be very nice as well. So, speaking of all that, I was talking about how I've been watching the old Money in the Banks, and by the old Money in the Banks, I mean the ones that came along when the Thunderverse era started, 2018 and 2019, and I just finished 2019 this morning, and in fact, I watched the brunt of it with Lightning Lad after we watched SmackDown, and what else? I just watched, like, the remainder of the Braves game and the LA Sparks game. Regular sports. No consequence to this podcast. But we watched Money in the Bank 2019, which happened like a couple months before the Extreme Rules 2019, which he did actually see live when we were recording over at Dave & Buster's back then. And so he got to see the majority of all that. And holy shit, I cannot believe how respected the Cruiserweight Championship was back then, because it was even like further up the card than the fucking United States Championship, which was Rey Mysterio and Samoa Joe, and it was Tony Nese defending it against Arya Daivari, and now they're both released, so it's like, god damn it. But it's like, the Cruiserweight Championship actually like made it onto a main pay-per-view, and especially with it being Money in the Bank, which you could argue is like the biggest one outside of the big four. And it's just like, WWE's definitely dropped the ball in some respects, but what else is new? And then, of course, it was always great to see Becky Lynch beat Lacey Evans. And then, of course, Charlotte comes in right afterwards and be like, hey, we're having that SmackDown tag team, or the SmackDown Women's Championship match now. And then Becky only lose because Lacey Evans hit her with a woman's right in the face. And then Bayley comes in, cashes in on Charlotte, and becomes SmackDown Women's Champion. And pretty much keeps that championship forever, because nobody remembers that she actually lost it for a week back in October and then got it back. I think it was the Fallout show for that Hell in a Cell that no one wants to remember, I guess. But yeah, that was the whole Bayley winning Money in the Bank and getting the SmackDown Women's Championship was definitely kind of the beginning of the end for good guy Bayley, which is fine because her heel persona is absolutely delightful. I'm actually not annoyed by it at all. It tickles me pink, to be honest. But then, of course, start watching Extreme Rules, and of course, I will never get tired of seeing Roman Reigns and The Undertaker team together. And then saw the Revival, who were the Raw Tag Team Champions. I'm just like, and to think, over a year later, they'll be AEW Tag Team Champions. And AEW wasn't even really around. I mean, they were kind of around. Like, they had just had Double or Nothing a couple months before. And I think they had Fyter Fest that month. The first Fyter Fest and Fight for the Fallen. But yeah, Dynamite didn't exist yet. So AEW, as we know it, was definitely in its infancy compared to what we have. But yeah, FTR are the Raw Tag Team Champions, and they beat the Usos, who, I forgot came to Raw for the Superstar Shakeup, which only lasted for like a couple months because like Jimmy or both of them got into some legal trouble and they were off TV for a while until they came back in the fall to help Roman in his feud with King Corbin and Dolph Ziggler and Robert Roode, in which there was pretty much the same 6-man tag match on SmackDown for like a solid 6 months. And then, there was the 2-on-1 handicap match with Bliss Cross Applesauce before they officially became tag team champions. This is about a month before they won their first tag team championship, going against Bayley, and they were just like, we'll become SmackDown Women's co-champions. And then the Street Profits laughed at them. The Street Profits, who were just the NXT tag team champions at the time, it's just like, oh, they're so young now. And now Angelo Dawkins is getting murdered by Otis while Montez Ford is healing from injury. Those were the days. But anyway, speaking of all that, actually, flash forwarding to last Monday, superhero Nikki Cross, Nikki almost a superhero, actually beat Shayna Baszler, so she is definitely on a roll herself, and it was with the help of evil Alexa Bliss again, so I'm just feeling this sort of Bliss Cross Applesauce synchronicity coming back, huh? Boy. I mean, even if this does only last for the whole Money in the Bank program feud, which is just 2 weeks from yesterday, like, I'm still okay with this. If we just have one good run in it back leading up to Money in the Bank, that's fine. And if they happen to get back together or even like have a proper feud that lasts much longer than just one match and then we forget about it, I'm good with that as well. But, actually give it some real fucking closure. And reversing it back a little bit, the show began with the news that Randy Orton will not be there for the triple threat of the Last Chance qualifier between him and AJ Styles and Drew McIntyre because of unforeseen circumstances. So Riddle entered himself in, and he tried to just get himself right into the triple threat by handing a note where he was just like, "Aloha, this is the Viper, Randy Orton, and I want my brodacious bro Riddle to take my place in the triple threat." And they were just like, "This is obviously written by you. You even drew the snake on the letter." But it's just like, but you can participate on his behalf in the over-the-top battle royal, and if you win, you can go on to the triple threat. So that's what he got to do. And he won said battle royal, so he moved on to the triple threat. But this battle royal also fed into other stories like AJ Styles and Omos and the Viking Raiders, because that's a championship match that still needs to happen. And also the whole story going on between Mansoor and Mustafa Ali, where Mustafa Ali is trying to quote-unquote teach Mansoor about how to go about in WWE. And yeah, going back to Mustafa Ali a little bit, having watched Money in the Bank 2019 again, saw a very fresh case of what led to him becoming heel, because he was in that Money in the Bank ladder match in 2019, and he was like almost there about to get that briefcase when Brock Lesnar just popped in, pushed him off the ladder, or pushed the ladder down with him off the ladder, and his face met the top rope, and then came up and took the briefcase. So yeah, I'd become a heel too after that shit. And then, oh my god, Damian Priest was actually in said battle royal. Haven't seen him for a while. Heard he's been like dealing with some sort of back injury as of late, and that's why he hasn't been on TV. But once it gets better, that the writers will get him a story. But it was nice to see him there too. And then especially interacting with Riddle later, where he's just like, hey man, I just hope that you realize that Randy's lucky to have you as a friend, not the other way around. And then they went and got Chickings from Burger King together, apparently. Then Charlotte Flair teamed up with Natalya and Tamina and went against Rhea Ripley, teaming up with Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke, because of course they're all feuding. And honestly, I was kind of just rooting for what I guess was the heel team, even though it felt like Natalya and Tamina have been the baby faces in their particular feud with Mandy and Dana. Maybe that's just me. But it's just like, oh shit, you had a Flair, you had a Neidhart, and you had a Snuka all teaming up together. It's just like, I'll go for the legacy team. Fuck it. Besides, and this isn't a knock or an insult to her, but Rhea Ripley looked way out of place teaming with Mandy and Dana. And again, that's not a knock on Rhea Ripley. I love her, just not thrilled with that other team. And then in the main event, Riddle almost won the triple threat by RKOing AJ Styles, and then he got Claymored by Drew McIntyre. So Drew is actually going to Money in the Bank. So my prediction that Jinder Mahal was going to find a way to screw him over in this qualifier was way off base, but I mean, there's still room in the actual match itself for Jinder to go in there and screw him over, and then I guess we get Drew versus Jinder at SummerSlam? I don't know. But over on NXT, Isaiah Swerve Scott defeated Bronson Reed to become the new NXT North American champion, of course with the help of his new mates in Hit Row, even though Bronson definitely got Top Dollar and Ashanti the Adonis to crash into things as payback for trying to mess him up. So good. Swerve definitely deserved a little something because he's been a very fun talent to watch for the last couple of years. And also, yeah, he's been making a killing ever since he turned heel and, of course, formed Hit Row. And speaking of all that, starting on July 13th will be the next NXT Breakout Tournament, which will be a whole bunch of new faces that will surely be, at least most of them should be staples of NXT, because the one and only time they had the Breakout Tournament was 2019. Keep going back to that year. And it was pretty much the debuts of Isaiah Swerve Scott, Angel Garza, Bronson Reed, Joaquin Wilde, Raul Mendoza, Cameron Grimes, and a lot of other names that I think Boa was still in there. I mean, he's starting to finally find his footing with Tian Sha a little bit. So, yeah, we'll see who's going to be in this tournament and see what impact they'll have on NXT going forward once the tournament's over. And hopefully the result turns out a lot better than it did 2 years ago, because the winner of all that was Jordan Miles. And yeah, his WWE career didn't end on the most positive, happy note because of real life stuff. If you know, you know. If you don't, look it up or don't worry about it. But yeah, with Bronson losing the North American Championship after a few weeks, you know, he could be fast tracking to the main roster. And even Bronson Reed and Karrion Kross were on WWE Main Event, the Raw pre-show or warm-up dark matches on the previous week, which, if that's any indication of how their entrance will be on the main roster, then yeah, I can wait for Karrion Kross to make it up to the main roster, because there was no smoke show, there was no Scarlet, it was just the LED entrance board behind him, like showing a red portal. And it's just like, oof. If that's all he's going to get on the main roster, which I doubt it would, but I mean, you never fucking know. Then it's just like, we can keep Kross an NXT staple forever. I mean, ultimately, he is good enough to be on the main roster. And if he wants to be on the main roster, he can go ahead. But again, like I said, I'm not super going to be anticipating his debut on the main roster. And so the rundown for the Great American Bash, which will be this Tuesday, will be Adam Cole versus Kyle O'Reilly 2, Karrion Kross versus Johnny Gargano for the NXT Championship, Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell versus Io Shirai and Zoe Stark for the NXT Women's Tag Team Championship. Hit Row's going to have a celebration for Swerve's North American Championship victory. LA Knight versus Cameron Grimes for the $1 Million Championship. And MSK versus Tommaso Ciampa and Timothy Thatcher for the NXT Tag Team Championship. No far on Impact, we've announced Chris Sabin versus Moose for Slammiversary after Moose turned his back on Team Dreamer when he and Chris Sabin and Sami Callihan were facing Team Callis, which was Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers. And this Thursday, Susan and Kimberly will be facing Rosemary and Havoc, trying to get up there for the Knockouts Tag Team titles. And that was after, they've... Well, I guess they're currently still dealing with the fallout of Deonna Purrazzo pretty much kicking them to the curb. And they were talking about what they're going to do going forward and going after the Knockouts Tag Team titles. And Kimberly actually mentioned, maybe we have to bring out Su Yung. And I'm just like, yes, please do. Please bring out Su Yung. And we're going to commercials. And when we come back, we'll pretty much be reminiscing about Daly's Place because AEW's had their last show there. At least until they come back during their tour. And talk about some Smackadowns. So enjoy these commercials.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Tony.
Do you like ads about podcasts?
You know it.
How about ads about Doctor Who podcasts?
Even better.
Well, you're in luck because this is an ad about a Doctor Who podcast.
Wow, I love it.
And you'll love us, the Watchathon of Rassilon, a podcast about Doctor Who.
I'll buy 12.
Actually, it's free.
I'll buy 13 then.
My name is Mark McCrae, and I'm the author of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives.
I'm Dan Klink, co-host of the Best Saturdays of Our Lives podcast.
The Best Saturdays of Our Lives features programming trends from the 1966 television season all the way through the last hurrah of the early digital age of the 1990s.
On the show, if it's animated, we talk about it.
Order your signed copy today at tbsool.com.
And listen to the podcast at esonetwork.com and all podcast platforms.
Hello. Have you ever wondered how much Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster sold Superman's rights to DC for? Or which popular football star was the Sam Wilson the Falcons' physical appearance based on? You can find all that and more at the History of Comic Books podcast, a podcast dedicated to the creators, events, history, and the companies that made the great comic book medium. Hosted and created by your friendly neighborhood JT Wheatley. Please give it a listen at iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, and all our podcasting platforms. Thank you, and go ahead and enjoy yourself a good comic book.
Hey guys, gals, and non-binary pals.
It's Amanda Bones.
And I'm Ashley.
Of How to Talk to Your Friend About Wrestling, the podcast on the Count Out Wrestling Podcast Network, a weekly show where we talk about all of our favorite things, babes, blood, and brutality.
We also talk about other fun things, like is Kenny Omega finally too tan? And how much blood is too much blood? Because that looks like way too much blood.
So join us on the adventure of teaching me, Amanda Bones, about wrestling.
Look, we gotta talk.
Yeah, Thunder Talk.
We're going all kinds of sideways with that sweet nerd junk.
Woke nerd junk.
It's topical.
Political.
Dare I say radical.
We've got all your latest news and reviews.
Hot music.
And a whole lot of comedy.
But it ain't for kids.
Definitely mature content.
So let's talk.
Let's talk Thunder Talk.
Thunder Talk is a proud member of the ESO Network.
So last Wednesday, AEW finally had their last show at Daly's Place again, like I said, until they come back to Jacksonville later on in the year. And yeah, I just wanted to take this segment to just say my own farewell to Daly's Place, as it's helped carry us through pretty much this entire pandemic. I mean, the first couple months were at the Nightmare Factory building in Georgia. But yeah, Daly's Place was pretty much a very familiar scene for us who watch AEW week in and week out, especially if you also watch fucking Dark and Elevation. And in fact, even they've spent more time in Daly's Place than they have touring in the whole lifespan of Dynamite, because the first 5 months at Dynamite they were on the road, and then of course March happened. They were in the Nightmare Factory for a couple months, and then from May 2020 to June 30th 2021, fucking 13 whole months, they've basically lived at Daly's Place. So I just wanted to go over a whole lot of stuff, and I just wrote all this from memory, so I probably forgot something that I'll probably just be like, damn it, should have written that down. But yeah, just really talking about the return of some legends who've gotten a sort of second lease at life in the wrestling business in some degree or another. Like, of course, Matt Hardy, Sting, Mark Henry, even though he's only been out like once or twice, but once Rampage debuts next month, he'll be a color commentator. Paul White, who you barely see on Dynamite, but still, you can see him every week on Dark Elevation. And of course, Christian. And then, of course, there was the arrival of the Brody Lee and the Dark Order really finding themselves, because it got a little weird in the first few months because it was just Evil Uno and Stu Grayson and a whole bunch of weird masked crawlers. Like, it was at that point where they really earned their nickname of spooky perverts. But yeah, once Brody Lee came along and they added everybody else, and they got their time on BTE to develop their characters and the group as a whole, and now we know them as the very lovable baby faces that they are today. And of course, there was the birth of the TNT Championship, of which ever since I saw that thing, I wanted a fucking replica of it. Still haven't gotten it yet because I'm just a slack ass. But yeah, it was a really cool tournament that I believe started during the Nightmare Factory tapings, and then I believe it concluded at Double or Nothing. So it concluded at Daly's Place, and I believe that's where we pretty much got the debut of Lance Archer. And then, of course, there was the wonderful finals match between Cody and Lance Archer, with Cody coming on top and becoming TNT champion. Oh, yeah, and that's another moment that, I can't forget about, was when Cody announced at Daly's Place that he's gotten the right to use his fucking last name again, and he's henceforth has been announced as Cody Rhodes. And then, of course, the rise of the Future definitely happened there in an environment that I think definitely helped a lot more than if it was on the road, or maybe not. But I feel like we definitely gave more opportunities to up and comers that probably wouldn't have been otherwise been there. So, of course, we saw the rise of Anna Jay and Preston Vance and John Silver and Alex Reynolds. So, okay, basically Dark Order. I'm just reiterating that point. And then, of course, the rise of other talent like Abaddon, and then tag teams that are like legit tag teams who are ranked, have been ranked, and have gotten tag team championship opportunities that were born out of them just mixing and matching enhancement talent and to see who would click. Like the Acclaimed, which used to just be the talent or the enhancement talent that was Max Caster and Anthony Bowens. Like, they were just tagging with random dudes and just getting, like, just doing jobs. And then they got together, and then they really made it something. And now, every week, I at least got to watch part of Dark or Dark Elevation and hear what Max Caster's going to rap about now. Because, I mean, it used to be annoying. It used to be like, oh, he's just ripping off John Cena. But he's really made it his own, and it's been really fucking entertaining. So, I mean, we created a legit tag team in the division out of just happening to swap enhancement talent and pairing them together. And, I mean, ditto for Varsity Blondes. Because, of course, you know, there was Brian Pillman Jr. and Griff Garrison. And, of course, their name derives from a Varsity Blues and also mixed with a Hollywood Blondes, where Brian Pillman Sr. tagged with Steve Austin back in the early 90s. And for a while, it was just, they were called Varsity Blondes, and Brian Pillman Jr. and Griff Garrison they were just in the regular clothes, and they were just coming out, whatever, or their regular gear. And now they've got, like, Letterman jackets, like they're actually fucking varsity football players or sports stars. And they have Julia Hart with them, a 2-time national champion in cheerleading. So, yeah, they're like a fucking legit group in this division. And then there's Lee Johnson and Austin and Colton Gunn in the Nightmare family. Because Lee Johnson was just an enhancement talent who was a student at the Nightmare Factory. And now he's like an official all-elite wrestling superstar or wrestler. I don't know, whatever word they want to use. Who's like on the up and up. Along with Austin and Colton Gunn, who are just tagging with their dad. But seem primed to break out and become their own unit whenever Billy Gunn decides to hang it up. And then there's Nick Camarado, Aaron Solo, and Anthony Ogogo in the factory. Of course, Anthony Ogogo having almost a star-making performance when in his feud with Cody earlier this year. I say earlier this year, but it was like a couple months ago. But we haven't seen him since, so I hope everything's okay. And Darby Allin, who was already very popular when AEW and Dynamite began, just raising his young profile with a wonderful TNT championship run and his alliance with Sting definitely did not hurt. And, of course, the most important thing being long-ass Dark and Elevation episodes featuring and giving everyone else valuable on-screen time and experience. I mean, ever since they moved to Daly's Place, or really maybe since the pandemic era began, but I think it's when they went to Daly's Place and was just like, oh yeah, we can just fucking go however long we fucking want. Like, these episodes have been pushing like an hour and a half, 2 hours. Like, they could have been their own shows. And it used to be like an episode of Dark during their original live road run was just like maybe 40 minutes. And yeah, now it's like an hour and a half. And then there was the women's tag team tournament, which brought us teams like Diamante and Ivelisse, and it was more furthering the story. Remember when Brandy Rhodes and Allie teamed together? And of course it brought us the team of Ty J or Tay J, whichever you want to call it, with the team of Anna J and Tay Conti, which became pretty much the breakout most popular team in that tournament, which even translated over into the Dark Order story, where they were, after the tournament, they've been trying to recruit Tay to join them, and then after Dark Order turned face, I guess they were cool with just, being best buds with Tay, and she's been actually not really, she hasn't joined them, but she's kind of been the substitute female presence while Anna Jay's been trying to repair and rehab her shoulder. And she's even, during her own matches, had the Dark Order just, come out, escort her out, and then they just go back in. And she's been escorted to the ring by -1, Brody Lee Jr., and they've developed a real life big sister, little brother bond, which was really nice to see. And then the list I call WWE is going to regret that. Most of these, or I'd say half of these, were from the fucking Black Friday or Black Thursday, Black Wednesday releases from April 2020, but also just talent released in different parts by WWE, either because the talent wanted out or just because. But guys like FTR, formerly known as The Revival, Matt Cardona, who showed up a little bit in AEW and then went to Impact, that being the former Zack Ryder, or Brett Major if you want to throw it back. And then, as we mentioned, Ty Conti and Miro, formerly known as Rusev, finally getting the due we've been waiting for during his Rusev days. And then Brody Lee, of course. I don't think we can mention Brody Lee enough during this particular segment. Christian, now Christian Cage, only a few months after he made his incredible in-ring return after 7 years in the Royal Rumble and having that nice hug with Edge. And Paul White, now a commentator, formerly known as Big Show. Mark Henry, still Mark Henry. And most recently, Andrade El Idolo. And, I guess we could say the Good Brothers, even though they're technically Impact stars, but lately it seemed like they're more on Dynamite than they are on Impact. So I'll throw them in there, why not? And then Stadium Stampede 1 and 2, those were just amazing. I remember the first time I watched Stadium Stampede when it was Inner Circle versus The Elite, and I was just like, that is such a beautiful stadium. Not as beautiful as Mercedes-Benz Stadium, but it's just like, man, I kind of want to watch a Jacksonville Jaguars game at some point, a home game. This is just a very nice stadium. Of course, I never ended up watching a Jags game because A, didn't have the time, and B, Jags games weren't really on TV, not on prime time, and definitely not in my TV market. But still, kudos to them. They do have a very nice looking stadium. And of course, Stadium Stampede 2, again, sort of having that same feeling, especially when Jericho and MJF were fighting past Urban Meyer and Charlie Strong, and Urban Meyer actually helped Jericho, handed him something, I forget what it was. And then finally, Blood and Guts, aka War Games, because they were teasing Blood and Guts. That was originally what turned into Stadium Stampede 1 between Inner Circle and the Elite. And then it was originally going to be Blood and Guts, which was literally War Games. And then it got turned into Stadium Stampede because we had pretty much no fans at all. And they wanted to save it for when fans came back. And then at the beginning of May, a couple months ago, we finally got Blood and Guts between the Pinnacle and Inner Circle, with the Inner Circle being the baby faces, which I never would have imagined back in May 2020. And then, of course, big shout out to Hikaru Shida on her 1+ year championship reign during this whole pandemic era. She should get all the kudos any chance we get, just like Drew McIntyre and his WWE championship reign, which was entirely without fans. But at least Shida got her last couple months, at least, with fans in the building. And big shout out to Britt Baker winning it off her at Double or Nothing this year and fulfilling that potential that she had been building towards pretty much ever since she signed with AEW. And then, of course, the Dynamite where we said goodbye to Brody Lee and had the Dark Order teaming up with all the baby faces, which was not a one-off. Now Dark Order is part of the baby faces. They were on their way to that anyway. and they were just teaming up with the good guys, and -1 got to pretty much book that whole card, and he wanted to see the Dark Order team up with his favorites and go against the bad guys. So yeah, it was definitely a heavy episode, but it was it was a nice episode. Definitely paid tribute to Brody Lee, who made such a strong impact on AEW in the brief time he was there. That's, I'm sure, still going to be felt within the AEW world for years to come. And of course, in that episode, it was very nice at the end to see Eric Redbeard, formerly known as Eric Rowan, who was released in the Black Friday 2020 releases, like actually get to do something again and embrace, I think it was Silver and Reynolds, and hold up a sign that said, and he held up a sign that said, "We'll miss you, Brody." So yeah, a whole lot happened during that time, but yeah, officially in AEW's world, the pandemic era is now over. Whew. Didn't really think much about or really imagine when I'd get to say that here on this show, but yeah. And I think when I talk about Road Rager next week, I'm going to say it again, because fuck it, it's my show! And yeah, with Road Rager, yeah, don't forget, it is the South Beach strap match between Cody Rhodes and QT Marshall. And there's also the AEW Tag Team Championship between the Young Bucks and Eddie Kingston and Penta El Cero Miedo. And the first ever AEW mixed tag team match between Orange Cassidy and Chris Statlander versus, oh my goodness, almost blanked, the Blade and Alley, and the Bunny. Sorry, don't kill me, Bunny. And oh yeah, and I think the only other thing announced on the card, at least I can remember, is Andrade El Idolo making his AEW in-ring debut against Matt Sydal, I believe. Of course, Britt Baker versus Nyla Rose isn't happening until Fyter Fest Night 2, which is 2 weeks from this Wednesday. So, move on to SmackDown, which I was watching with Dan, and I was also watching very drunk. Start out with Edge calling out Roman, which feels like forever since I've said that, but it's only been like maybe 4 months. But, I mean, hello, a lot's happened in 4 months. And then Seth is still raging like, what the fuck, where's my opportunity? But, so he's just like, or Sonya Deville and Adam Pearce was just like, yeah, you can't face Roman at Money in the Bank for the Universal Championship, but you can face Cesaro in the Money in the Bank qualifying match, and you can get the briefcase and do it again. Which, I mean, Seth Rollins and that briefcase do have a pretty great history, so. And Kevin Owens defeated Sami Zayn in the Last Man Standing Money in the Bank qualifying match. And then Sonya Deville announced the newest Money in the Bank women's qualifier, Zelina Vega, who, of course, had been fired the last few months. And, of course, they had fired her husband, Aleister Black, now known as Tommy End, a few weeks ago. But now she's back. And, of course, a couple months prior, they said she was at the Performance Center, like internet news websites and all that. But, I mean, that could amount to absolutely nothing. But apparently it amounted to this. Zelina Vega is now back and in the Money in the Bank qualifying match. And Liv Morgan, who had already beat Carmella, who was announced for the Money in the Bank qualifying match, was just like, what the fuck? And so Sonya was just like, here, you fight Zelina now. And then Zelina tried to hold Liv's tights in a surprise roll-up, but Liv countered with a roll-up of her own and held her tights, but the ref didn't catch her, and she got the 1, 2, 3. So, I mean, I'm not mad at it. Liv's now been winning 3 weeks in a row. I will never, ever, ever be mad at that. And I'm sure Liv will just finally end up being the last woman announced for the Money in the Bank ladder match, which there's 2 empty spots left on that side. So I'm sure Sonya will announce someone else, and then Liv will beat them, and then finally on the 16th in front of fans. Hello, now this just seems like really obvious to me, but it'll still be really awesome to see. Liv's going to be finally get into the Money in the Bank ladder match, and the fans are going to go, ah. Of course. See, now I want Liv to win the women's Money in the Bank, and I want Kevin Owens to win the men's Money in the Bank. And Kevin Owens has been planting these seeds for Money in the Bank over the last few months, because once his feud with Roman ended at the beginning of the year, he was on Talking Smack, and he told Paul Heyman, I'm going to go and win Money in the Bank, and then I'm going to cash in on Roman, and then I'm going to get the last laugh. And even he was on Talking Smack this past week. Paul Heyman wasn't on it. It was Kayla Braxton and Pat McAfee. And so Kevin Owens actually called Paul Heyman, and he star 67 his number. And Kevin was just like, hey, I just want you to know, I'm in the Money in the Bank ladder match, and I'm going to get that briefcase, and I'm going to take that Universal Championship from Roman. And then Paul was just like, you have the wrong number, sir. Good stuff. And in the main event, Jimmy Uso called out Edge, and then Edge, basically, long story short, speared him, broke off part of a steel chair, and put that piece across Jimmy Uso's mouth, and just did that sort of crossbar thing, I guess you could call it, that he did to Roman at WrestleMania. And Jimmy had the same look of, oh, fuck, in his eyes that Roman had back then, which just proved Edge's point from the beginning of the episode. So yeah, that was that. Of course, the first Friday I have off in months, and I end up being able to get down and watch SmackDown live, no pun intended. Of course, Roman's not on that show, but whatever. It happens. So yeah. Did I have anything else for you? Nope. I think that's pretty much it. That is the 1, 2, 3. Thanks for locking up with me in the Ring of Thunder. Kick butts, not nuts.
Welcome to the most electrifying wrestling podcast in the Thunderverse and the ESO network. From the power of the people's host, Sexy Thor, critics say, it doesn't matter what the critics say. You already know you're in for a hammer-swinging, burrito-eating, mic-blazing, hair-raising time with this weekly wrestling adventure. WWE, AEW, Impact, and whatever else I can possibly fit. If you hear what the Thunder is talking.
Welcome to Dr. Geek's Laboratory.
Hello everyone, Dr. Geek here with a shout out to all the scientists who worked tirelessly to bring a COVID-19 vaccine into reality. Let's face it, creating something of this magnitude is a miracle worthy of Dr. McCoy himself. And now, Dr. Geek needs you to do your part. Remember, each shot is one small step back to normal, one giant leap to putting the pandemic behind us. We can do this. For more information, visit vaccines.gov to find your nearest provider.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.